Hello, my name is David and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm coming to you with a book haul. So I know this isn't the video you expected to come out next after my last video. The review for Velocity Weapon is still coming and hopefully later today. Uh, you know, I'm not trying to put pressure on myself to make videos in a certain time frame this week, being on vacation and trying to get some things done, not the least of which is doing some serious reading, which I haven't really been able to do quite to the degree that I want to. Although I have been enjoying getting around to a poem a day and a short story a day, in addition to making progress in a big ship at the end of the universe. But today I spent the day doing pretty much a road trip. Made a pretty big circuit around the central part of Iowa to go to 5 different bookstores from my Indie Bookstore roadmap to check them out and to give them a little business in each of those locations. And so I just wanted to walk you through where I stopped at and what I picked up from each of those locations. If you follow me on Instagram, you can see the different locations that I went to. I didn't take a whole bunch of pictures because the focus wasn't on photography and I'm not good at taking pictures anyway. But I wanted to share where I went. So first I started off with a very long drive. Left about 9:30 this morning and headed out to Oskaloosa, where I went to the Book Vault, which is a little bookstore there. When I got there, I thought I was going to be impressed by the store. Seemed like they had a decent selection of books. The typical, here's some bestsellers, here's some staff recommendations. Pretty close inside, there was a vault, essentially. Thus the name, the Book Vault. I'm assuming it's where a bank or something was. But inside the vault, they had the mystery and the horror and the true crime genres all contained inside that little vault, which I thought was pretty cool and thematic, and the picture didn't turn out nearly as well as I expected it to, but again, I wasn't focused on that, but that is on my Instagram, where you can see a very not good picture of the vault. And so I looked around. They had about half a shelf of some classics, and I started to notice a trend as I was looking through here, in that a lot of the books were facing cover out to make it look like they were more packed than they really were. I don't know if they just were running low on inventory or if it's pretty normal for them. They do have a really big space because they even had a second level. And so I had to go up to that second level. They had a sign pointing up, and that was where kids' books and YA books and science fiction fantasy were to be found. And so I went up there. I was going, kind of my flow through each of these stores followed the same kind of pattern with one exception, in that I would look at the classics and poetry first to see what I could find in each of those. And then I would go over to sci-fi fantasy because that's what I've been mood reading hard into, a lot of the sci-fi and some fantasy. So I figured I'd encourage myself to continue the mood reading and align with my preferred genres that I read a ton of growing up. And so here I went up to the fantasy section, and there wasn't a whole lot in the sci-fi fantasy. Not much really jumped out at me. One of the Martha Wells Murderbot books was there, but I couldn't bring myself to pay $20 for a very short novella. And so after some looking, I was down to picking up either Patrick Rothfuss or a Brandon Sanderson. And what I decided at that spot, and I held to it all day long, was I was going to prioritize getting something I haven't read versus something that I've read and I know that I love. So Sanderson, I reread almost everything by Brandon Sanderson last year. Everything in the Cosmere, preparing for Rhythm of War, which came out, which they had Rhythm of War there, along with Way of Kings and the first Mistborn book and a few others. But uh, I picked up Name in the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. They gave me a little bookmark that they slipped in there from the book vault. And then here's what you just did, and 10 things that you did to by shopping locally. So that's kind of cool. I appreciated the store as a whole, as is normal. I mean, mass market paperback. I remember when they used to be $6, $7, $8 for a mass market paperback, and not this $11 nonsense. It was hard to justify pulling the trigger on that, knowing especially that I could go to Half Price Books here in Des Moines and probably pick up 4 copies of that for $4 or $5 a piece. But the point was to support these indie bookstores, so I went ahead and picked up Name of the Wind. I've got a nice pristine copy, and I still haven't read any Patrick Rothfuss. So it's been one of those big giant holes in my reading experience. So after the book vault, I traveled north from there to Grinnell, where I went to Pioneer Bookshop, which is a bookstore. I didn't know it at the time, but it's a Grinnell College bookstore. So I walked in, and about half the store was college related merchandise. And then another quarter of it were college textbooks. And I browsed through the college textbooks because, you know, I do go off of syllabi and things like that to find books that I like to read. So I figured I'd kind of browse through there and see what I could find. And there were some that seemed like they would be interesting. There were plenty that I probably would have bought. But it wasn't like they were at a really good price. Even the used ones weren't really offering much of a good deal. And as kind of an example of that, one of the books there that they had for textbooks was the Landmark Arian, which is the campaigns of Alexander, and I want the Landmark books. And I can hop on Amazon and get it from anywhere between 15 on a really, really good day to 25 as a really bad price. Currently, right now, it's at $23.36. And they had the new copies at 30 and used copies at, like, I think 24. And they didn't have any used copies in stock. So it wasn't worth it for the textbooks. And I get it. I mean, textbooks have their own crazy market. I remember from my college days, they aren't cheap. So I browsed. They had a couple of classics scattered throughout. They had a single shelf of poetry, a narrow shelf with nothing that jumped out at me. So I went over to the science fiction fantasy and found a decent selection there. I probably could have spent my entire budget just in that store on the books there. I wouldn't have wanted to because I wanted to go see the other stores and have the other things, so I was trying to pace myself on my budgeting. And so I walked out of there with 2 books, book 1 in 2 different series. So the first book I walked out of there with is one that had caught my eye earlier this year. I have never seen it in the wild. Haven't been able to find it at any of my libraries, so I was super excited to see a copy there. I knew I was walking out with 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City by K.J. Parker, which is just sounds like a fascinating premise. And being the medieval fan that I am, I mean, the title just calls to me, and it did from the first time I saw the title. I said, I need to read this. And then you start reading the back, Siege is approaching. Well, of course, yeah, that's they've got me nailed. So I was happy to pick that one up. There were a couple others that I was debating between, and ultimately, I on a third glancing through the titles, finally noticed that they had consider Felvis by Ian M. Banks. So if you watched my sci-fi series that I need to start soon, the Culture series was one of those, and this is book one in that Culture series. So this is one of those, just like the 16 Ways, these are the trade paperback size. So I think that's what they're called, trade paperbacks. So they're taller, typically narrower, and typically about twice, at least an extra 33-40% higher in price than the mass market paperback. Why they like going with the style, I get it, because it's closer to the same size as a hardcover, I guess, maybe. They can sell it for a higher price and people pay for it because it's probably more durable than a mass market paperback. But, I mean, really? Why? What's wrong with the mass market paperback? I'd buy a lot more books from you guys if you publishers would just put everything in a mass market paperback instead of expecting me to pay $18 a pop, $16 a pop for a single book. But these do make nice volumes to have on the shelf, and they look good, and they're going to be durable, and so they make good ones for ones that are series that I'm going to pick up and continue to purchase and collect. And everything that I know about this tells me that I'm probably going to really enjoy it. So those were the two that I got from the Pioneer Bookshop. So from there, I jumped west to Marshalltown to Read a Book Nook, which was a really interesting name. I thought that was a pretty cool name. And so Google gave me an address, and it was supposed to be on the square on the main street. Went there, didn't see any signs for it. Went to the location that was pictured on Google for where it is, and it was not that place. So I walked in there and asked where the Read a Book Nook was. And hey, they've moved into the mall next to Planet Fitness. Okay, so now I have to figure out where on earth the mall is. Thankfully, it's only about 2 miles away. And so I headed out that way. And again, there's nothing advertising it on the outside. So I went back towards where the Planet Fitness was. Said, okay, well, here's like a little consignment shop next to it that looks pretty big. Maybe it's through here somewhere. And I walk in, and one whole wall on there. And this is a deep wall. So shelf after shelf after shelf in the Read a Book Nook. And these are all, I can tell immediately, very used books. So I was excited initially because used book to me means that I can get 3 or 4 for the price of one, which is a great way to economize that budget and get a whole bunch of picks. And I started looking around and saw a book that jumped out at me, picked it up, looked at the price tag. It was a pretty well-worn used book, and it was marked at $8. Okay, well, I don't want this for that. Kept looking, found other, pulled it out, and 15. Like, there's no way. No, I put that one back. So I kept looking, and that was the trend that I was coming across with everything that was jumping out to me. And I eventually found, because they had little post-it notes, it was not well organized. But they had one distinct section that had science fiction and fantasy. It was 2 shelves. Neither of them were completely full top to bottom. And the first thing I noticed as I was kind of looking through the titles, 2 full shelves in there were Star Trek novels. So if I was in on this Star Trek read along that everybody was doing, that is currently doing, I would be able to get set on that. And then they had 2 full shelves of overpriced Wheel of Time books. And then there was a pretty okay-ish mix from there. You know, a dozen Terry Brooks, a couple dozen Piers Anthony and other authors that are really prolific, but you grab a book and it's like book 16 in the series, and you're just like, well, I can't pick that up. And I spent a lot of time looking in there, a lot more time than it deserved. But I was determined to buy at least something from each store, and I was probably going to pick up a pretty beat up copy of Gunslinger for Stephen King for $5. And then I went back to the sci fi fantasy one more time to look there. And two Isaac Asimovs caught my eye finally, mixed in with all that stuff. And so I was like, okay, Isaac Asimov, I can do. Um, and they were both robot series. So I'm like, okay, well, I need the robot series. That was one of my book series that I want to start, and I have book one. So let's see what we have. The first one I pull off, even though it said right on the spine Isaac Asimov, it is Isaac Asimov's Robot Universe. So it is a story written by somebody other than Isaac Asimov set in his robot universe. And it was priced at $1, so it would have been a perfect price if it had been actually by Isaac Asimov. And so I pulled the other one off, not expecting to have much better luck. But I did. Robots of Dawn. Not terribly beat up. So this was one of the better condition books that they had in there. And at a decent price at $2. That's 2, not a 5. So this is book 3 in his robot series. So now I've got book 1 and book 3. And so I was happy about getting this and finding it. I was unhappy about the disappointment overall of that store. That is one I'm probably never going to go back to, unless I happen to be in Marshalltown and want to look for some books. But yeah, it was very disappointing in how poorly organized it was, how you'd come across shelves. And I mean, the whole shelf top to bottom might have 2 authors, and it would have those 2 authors' names. And you're just like, I haven't ever heard of these authors. Why are they getting so much space? Well, it's probably because they're the popular ones that everybody's buying and then selling because they aren't reading them, or they've read them and don't ever want to reread them. So after that, I had 2 more stops planned. Grabbed some lunch on the way out of Marshalltown and headed over to Ames, which I had some optimism for, knowing that Ames is a college town, but also at the same time fearing that I would run into something similar to what I ran into at Grinnell, with it being the college affiliated bookstore. So the vast majority of it is not so much on books, but on textbooks and college merchandise. And so I arrived at Dog-Eared Books, which the name is probably going to make some people cringe at the idea of it. Got this nice little bag, and you can see the little dog ear. And as soon as I walked in, I knew I was in the right place. This was the bookstore that was going to redeem the rest of the trip. The sad thing is I could have made it there in an hour from home and have avoided a lot of the long drive for the other 3 places. It was closer to home than the others, which is, it's good information. No, I mean, that was the whole point, was to go out and give some support to these businesses and find out which ones I would want to go back to in the future. Because I had really good success a couple weeks ago with Page Turners, which is only about 40 minutes from home. And I ended up skipping that one today, even though I went right past it, because I wanted to make sure the last one on my stop closed earlier than everything else. It also opened much later. Its hours were 11 to 4. So I wanted to make sure I had enough time to get there and didn't want to wait the 15 minutes I would have had to hang around in Indianola to go to Page Turners again, especially since I would have had to start with them. But anyway, back to Dog-Eared Books. So you walk in, they've got a coffee bar over on the side where you can order your caffeinated beverages and get those made for you, which is always a nice, reassuring touch, and just packed with books inside. And it was reassuring. I mean, tables in the middle where they had some bestsellers and new features. And on one of the tables, I saw She Who Became the Sun, which is a really recent one. Mulan meets, I can't even remember what else. But it's supposed to be one of the hot new fantasy books. And so I was tempted to grab that because at this point in time, I'm way under budget per store. So it's like, well, if I don't find anything else, I'll grab this $30 hardcover and feel good about it. 30 is more than what I wanted to spend on any one book, but I would do it. So I started looking around, looked through the classics and found some good stuff. And then over by the YA section, or by the kids book section, I saw two shelves so at the top of each shelf, they have like a little chalkboard, not a shelf, but kind of a shelf insert almost. It's almost shelf sized, where they had written up there what the genre was for the shelf. And they had two shelves, and it was previously loved on the two shelves there. And that made me smile, because that's a clever way of putting used books without getting the stigma that hearing used would instantly put in some people's brains. My wife would be one of those, probably, because she'd prefer brand new, and she would probably prefer if I only bought brand new. And so I, of course, went and looked at those two shelves and didn't find a whole lot. But one book did jump out from there, and it was one that as soon as I saw it, I knew I was buying it. Unless I walked over to the sci-fi fantasy section and found it in a trade paperback to match the book 2 that I just got from Page Turners. And that is The Last Emperox by John Scalzi. So this is book 3 of his Interdependency trilogy. So I finished and have reviewed book 1, The Collapsing Empire. I picked up book 2 in a trade paperback at Page Turners a couple weeks ago, and now I have book 3 to conclude the trilogy. And it's one that as soon as I finish the Big Ship at the End of the Universe, that trilogy is probably what I'm rolling right into after that. Just so that I can get a series finished before starting another new series. But I'm excited. I was able to get that hardcover for $10. They obviously didn't have the trade paperback, because otherwise I would have been showing you that. And that would have probably also been either $9 or $10, because I can't remember which the price was for the one at Page Turners, but it would have been that same price. And so I went over. Sci-Fi Fantasy had 3 full shelves, top to bottom, packed full. I mean, everything was sideways, with very few exceptions. So these are very full shelves, and I was happy to see that. And they had some good ones. They had, I think, 5 or 6 of the Expanse series in stock there. They had all kinds of ones that jumped out at me. I could have easily gone there and only to that bookstore and walked out very happy, and had spent my entire budget in that one. But I told myself I still have another store to go. I'm going to spend close to the halfway point of what I've got left from my budget here. And so I walked out with 2 other books on top of The Last Emperox. Now, I was originally had in hand Neuromancer by William Gibson. It's a book that I've been wanting to reread. I read it probably about 10 years ago and did not enjoy it. It was really hard. It was dense and tough to get through. And I've really been wanting to get that book another read. And they had a trade paperback, so $8.99. And I held on to it for a while I was looking around, and ultimately I decided to put it back and grab a different trade paperback for the same price off the shelf, because again, I didn't want to buy something that I've already read. That was not the priority. And I also wanted to make sure that I'm buying something that I think is going to stick around. And $9 is more than I want to spend on Neuromancer. I want to try to find it for like $1 somewhere to give it a shot, or at a library and check it out from my library to give it another chance before I go and pick up a good copy of it. Because I'm even though I think I'll appreciate it more, I'm still not convinced it's going to be one of those that's going to stick. So I'll just keep holding off. It's not like I've got a shortage of books to be checking out. So instead, I picked up Ender's Shadow by Orson Scott Card. I knew this is going to be a hit for me. This follows Bean in a parallel to Ender's Game for the timeline. So I'm super excited about it. I've read the entire Ender. It's not even a quartet anymore. I think it's like 6 books with one that's coming out this month, I think, to expand that. But I have not read the Shadow series, so I was excited to pick this up because with it being a parallel to Ender's Game, this is going to be a nice, fun read to dive into, and it felt like a really, really safe bet. And then the other feels like a safe bet. I finally found in the wild a copy of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. And I just mentioned this in my weekly reads that I did when talking about A Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe, that I haven't read this yet, and that this is also supposed to be Firefly in book form. It's going to give you the Firefly vibes. And so I'm excited to read this. It was also on my sci-fi series that I need to read. And so I'm excited about this one. So after that, had one more stop to go. And it was to the bookshop out in Boone. About 20-minute drive, and this is the one that had the really, really short hours. So it was what dictated the path I had to go, and that it had to be the last one unless I wanted to start later than I had intended on doing my little trip. And so I went in with a preconceived stigma that I think Boone is kind of a smaller town, so I wasn't expecting much. I pulled up, and outside they had 2 carts full of hardcovers with a sign right on there, clearance, $5 or 3 for 10. I was like, okay, I'm liking this already. I start looking around, and there's a decent number of sci-fi and fantasy on there. Nothing that jumped out as I have to have it, but enough of a variety on there that if push came to shove, I could have easily gotten at least 6, maybe even more books off of that to get the $10 for every 3. So I was like, okay, even if I go in here and the store is absolute garbage on the inside, I've got something that has made this worthwhile out here. And I went inside. The door was locked, so the lady inside had to open it up to let me in, and really friendly gal. Chatted an awful lot. And so up at the front by the register, they had the new books, the new stuff that just came in. So she's telling me about that, and Robin Hobb catches my eye. I'm like, okay, well, there's something promising there, and I'm glancing at the new release stuff, and there's not a ton, but it's a decent selection. And then she points back behind her. I look up and notice finally that there's just wall or row after row after row, just jam-packed full of books stacked vertically along. So in multiple rows vertically on each shelf. She said, and these are all the used books. And I was hesitant. Read a Book Nook had looked promising and been a disappointment. So I walked over, and on this one I decided to start with the sci-fi fantasy. And holy cow, did this turn out to be a great spot. It might be my favorite bookstore of the 5. Just through the strength of the used book. And the gal said, hey, we've got everything that we have on the shelf is scanned into our system. So if there's something specific you're looking for, I can pull it up and see if we have it. If we don't have it, we can probably get it for you. It's like, okay, that's great. So I did some looking around, and I walked out with more books from here than anywhere else. Part of that's because these were, between $2 and $4 for most of them. So we'll start off with a Steve Donahue made me interested in it. Although if I would have seen it on my own, I would have picked it up. John Steinbeck, The Acts of King Arthur and His Noble Knights. So I'm excited about that. Steve Donahue, I believe in his S tag, had mentioned that. Next, we have a book that I know every one of you is going to be fighting over, wanting to get that review up quickly for you. I'll do my due diligence here. Chaucer and His Contemporaries. Yes, that's right. Essays on medieval literature and thought. I know. You all wish that you had a copy of this. I know I'm happy about it. It's going to talk about Chaucer, William Langland, the anonymous author of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, as essays from C.S. Lewis, Virginia Woolf. I am genuinely excited about this. I know that I'm probably one of two people that might be excited about it. So, Steve, if you're watching this, I'm assuming that you would be interested too. Maybe when I'm done reading it, I'll send it your way if you want. Then I've got one more in here. Let's try and get that one before I get to the sci-fi fantasy. Because I picked up mostly sci-fi fantasy from here, but I had 3 that were not science fiction and fantasy. And this one's Idols of the King by Alfred Lord Tennyson. So this is the one and only... No, there were 2 books I picked up here that broke my rule of I need to have not read it. Idols of the King is one of them. I've been looking for a copy of Idols of the King for a while and could never find one for less than $10 to $15. And every time I've found it, there was something else that I wanted for less than that, or to where I could get 2 books for the price of the same one. And it was always, well, I've already read Idols of the King. I wanted to be able to reread it eventually. So I would always put it back, but I was happy to spend $2 on this one. Fantastic work of Arthurian poetry. So it's all in verse by Tennyson. And I highly, highly recommend it. So let's start going into the books that I picked up for sci-fi fantasy. Most of these are kind of book ones of series. So one of them, I was hoping to find more. This is a Robin Hobb. This is Fool's Assassin. So this is book number 1 of Fitz and the Fool. One of the things I noticed after a while was on the back, they would notate what book number in a series it was that you're looking at. That's super helpful. Like, I wish more stores would do that. My goodness, I'm excited. So Fitz and the Fool, I think, so there's the Farseer trilogy, which is Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin, and Assassin's Quest. And then there's the Live Ship Traders, which I'm currently reading, and we'll be continuing that series next month. I was hoping to find book 2 of that. Can't even remember the name. So Mad Ship. That was one of 2 books that I was really, really hoping to find today, was Mad Ship by Robin Hobb, since I'm going to be reading that soon, but I didn't find it. But I was happy to pick up Fitz and the Fool. I ended up not picking up the first book of the Rain Wilds series because I know that's even later in the timeline. I'll get there eventually. So then we have The Mote in God's Eye by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. So this is the first book in the Motes series, which I've heard this is fantastic. It's about mankind's first encounter with alien life. So that's a really interesting one. The other author who I was looking for a specific book from, but didn't find, but I was happy to find something from, Dan Simmons. So I found Ilium. Pretty beat up copy, but the price was right on it. I was hoping to find Fall of Hyperion, which is book 2 in the Hyperion Cantos. But I'm happy about this because it's about Trojan War in space. So yeah, I'm genuinely excited for this 700 and some page epic at some point in time. Next, you fantasy fans, some of you are corrupting me. Joanna, Sarah, Dr. Philip Chase, I've got Malazan. or Malazan. Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson. I know I need to read this. I know it's going to just sweep me up once I do, because it's done it to so many other booktubers whose opinions and tastes I trust. So now I have book one. I'm one step closer to having no excuses to starting this series. So while there, I was looking at books that were, I was looking for specific authors and series, and happened to find Robots and Empire. So this is book 2 of the Robot series. So I had picked up book 3 at the Disappointing Used store. Found book 2 at this one. So I've got the first 3 books in that Robot series. So I've got Robots of Dawn on the shelf, so I'll be able to really dive right into that. Probably not jumping into the iRobot and the other novellas and stuff, the short story collections between. At least not yet. Next, we have another book 1 of a series, Rendezvous with Rama. So, and again, it's helpful because they tell you it's number 1 right here. That's not them telling you it's the best book in the world. Although I've heard great things about this. And the gal that, as she was scanning the books, she's like, have you read this one? This is fantastic. I'm like, I haven't yet, but I've heard that. And so I'm excited that you had book 1 in that series to finally try it. And this one almost made the cut on my series I need to start. If it didn't, I can't remember if it made that cut or not. If it didn't, it was number 6 out of 5. And then the last 3 books. So I found Forever War. So this was me breaking my word on only getting books that I haven't read, but that's because I found Forever Peace and Forever Free. So I've got all 3 books in that trilogy, and I'm happy to have them. My wife's going to be excited. None of them match each other. In fact, one's a hardcover and the other 2 are paperbacks. But this gets me the trilogy on my shelf. And then after I read all 3 of them and confirm that I do want all 3 of them, I can worry about getting a matching set later. I mean, these were all really well priced. So I'm happy to continue this series, and we'll probably try to do that sometime this year too, to get through that and the rest of that Scalzi Interdependency series. And then got a nice little bookshop bookmark. So all in all, I had a good time. It was a big long day, so this video is nothing based on how much time I spent on this trip, but I had a lot of fun. I thank my wife for giving me that idea. Hey, you should take a day and do this. Okay, you don't have to tell me twice. Just tell me what my spending limit is. But yeah, I mean, I had all kinds of fun. I got some books that I'm excited about. I've got some series that I'm excited to start. I've got continuations of series I'm excited to continue. And I'm going to impose on myself a freeze on buying books, with 2 exceptions. If I get a book as a gift, okay. The other exception would be I would probably give myself a pass on The Hobbit, because I need to pick up a copy of that and a copy of The Lord of the Rings ahead of the read-alongs I'm hosting in December and then into 2022. At the very least, The Hobbit, because that'll be starting before Christmas gets here. So I probably need to pick that one. But I'll be able to find it at a library, so I probably won't pick it up. And the same holds true with the Robin Hobb. I'll probably try to find that through the library to read along that when I'm reading it with Rachel is reading and Beth Ann. But yeah, I'm excited about everything that I got. Let me know in the comments what ones jumped out to you. What ones should I prioritize to read first? What should I be genuinely excited about from this book haul? Because I'm excited about pretty much everything in there. So thank you for watching. I'll just stop rambling here because this video's gone on long enough. So stay tuned. Velocity Weapon review will be coming soonish.